Hide my memories away.
You're the one who obeyed. You're the one who betrayed.
Hide my fears behind a smile.
Nothing's real anymore. Am I real? Am I?
Keep your distance. The voices inside me, they all terrify me. Keep your distance. They say I'm a traitor, but I can't remember. It's all in my head now, but it's all just the same. It's all in my head now. I think I might go insane. Tell myself I will be fine.
This was all my design. You will always be mine.
Find myself back here again.
You were never my friend. You were never my.
Keep your distance. I'm trying to fight it. I'm trying to hide it. Keep your distance. But I keep on hurting and you keep returning. It's all in my head now, but it's all just the same. It's all in my head now. I think I might go insane. Hello! Hello, chat. How are we all doing today? Chaos returns exactly, Sage. Except the chaos in question is going to be in the form of negotiations and politics in an SBI fanfiction. Because today we are reading chapter 8 of The Stars and Their Children. Now, if you don't know, The Stars and Their Children is, in the author's words, loosely based off of the world of Dune. SBI is chaos, though. So true. What was I saying? Oh yeah. Basically the premise, what we've read so far of The Stars and Their Children is, Wilbur and Tommy are half-siblings. Tommy is the heir to the throne, but they have to run away from their planet because the Assempi Empire takes over and tries to kill them. And so they take refuge on the Antarctic Empire's planet Zephys 4, where Emperor Philza reigns with his Imperator Technoblade. So far they tried to make negotiations with other planets or something in the previous chapter. I don't know. It was kind of boring because it was politics talk. Also, let me know if the music is too loud. I feel like it's a bit too loud. I'm gonna turn it down just a tad. There we go. We'll see what happens in chapter 8. But before we do, as always, if there's any new viewers to my streams, hello. My name is Claymation, or Clay for short, and I mainly do like Minecraft and story reading. So if you enjoy the vibes, be sure to leave a follow. It'll be very much appreciated. Oh, and what I wanted to say is, The Stars and Their Children is written by Bones and the Bees on Archive of Our Own. If you don't know who that is, you might be more familiar with her work, Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains. I've been, like, hooked on her writing style ever since reading that, and I've just been reading a bunch of her stuff on stream, with her permission, of course. Like, I wanted to make sure it wasn't against her boundaries to read her stuff on stream, so we're all good there. But enough of the regular chit-chat, I say we get into this. There we go. The Stars and Their Children by Bones and the Bees. Oh, by the way, as kind of a warning, I guess, I do voices for the characters. If it's cringe, I'm sorry. It helps with my immersion. God, you should have heard me try and do CPK's voice in the previous chapter. That was a nightmare. Alright. Chapter 8. A Clandestine Meeting. Summary. After the meeting, Wilbur's evening doesn't go as planned. Let's see, I don't think there are any trigger warnings for this chapter, so I hope you guys enjoy. Okay. Dinner that evening was tense, to say the least. The other leaders had settled themselves on one end of the dining table in the dining room, and while Wilbur knew it was probably in his and Tommy's best interest to sit with the rest of them to try and establish more connections, this is my bedtime story for tonight, if you want it to be. That's why I like doing these like later at night, because it kind of gives that like chill vibe, although sometimes I shout to get into character. And while Wilbur knew it was probably in his and Tommy's best interest to sit with the rest of them to try and establish more connections, he was already exhausted from their talk earlier, and he was sure Tommy felt the same. Recounting their experience on Eldingbecker had already wrung them both out enough, but Wilbur couldn't get Phil's whispered words out of his mind. "You can do better than that, Orpheus." The words were taunting, a mockery of his slip-up during the meeting. It was meant to get a rise out of him, but it was also calling him out on something he already knew. Wilbur could do better. Of course he fucking knew that, and it was humiliating to have Philza, the man, the emperor he was supposed to be negotiating with, point that out. Not to mention, Wilbur didn't miss the way Philza had called him Orpheus. Not Prince Orpheus, just Orpheus. Until now, Philza had never addressed him or Tommy without using their titles. But then, whispered in his ear, he dropped the title. It was another power play. Another way for Philza to remind Wilbur that in this game of wits they were playing, he was the master, not Wilbur. Wilbur wanted to be furious at this blatant show of disrespect, but all he could feel was humiliation. So he wasn't exactly up for more political games that evening after the meeting, and he was sure Tommy wasn't either. Wilbur didn't say anything as he settled himself at their usual spot next to Amesy and Rombu, and while Tommy gave him a curious look, he kept quiet as well. Also, I'm going to be drinking water a lot during this stream. because reading in this kind of voice really makes my throat sore for some reason. Maybe because I'm like slipping into a slightly lower voice that's not like that my vocal cords aren't used to. One glance down the table and Wilbur saw that Carl was telling some exciting story to Tina and Michael, waving his hands around like he was using an invisible paintbrush to cast streaks of color in the air that only he could see. Michael was nodding along, intently focusing on his words, while Tina seemed bored out of her mind, as if she'd heard whatever Carl was saying dozens of times before. Meanwhile, the Badlands Council were all huddled together, leaning in close and whispering feverishly in between bites of their meal. CPK was discussing something at length with Bad, while Skeppy and Punk nodded along. Sam was also nodding, but Wilbur could tell something was distracting him. His dark eyes kept flickering around the room, and when his eyes met Wilbur's for the briefest of seconds, Wilbur stiffened and glanced away. And lastly, Schlatt was already leaving the dining room. He had a plate stacked high with food in his hand, but didn't seem keen on eating in the presence of others, instead staggering away from the table with a tired-looking guard following behind him. Wilbur? You okay? It took Wilbur a moment to realize Amesy was saying his name, and jumped in his seat when they lightly tapped his shoulder. Sorry, I zoned out for a second. What did you say? I asked how the meeting went? Amesy asked, the flowers on their cheeks curling towards the small lamp pointed at their face. Oh, Wilbur blinked. It was fine. Amesy frowned. Their flowers dipped as if to match their expression. You sure? It was fucking annoying. Tommy cut in, and Wilbur silently thanked his little brother's ability to read him so well. We basically just repeated the same shit we've said before, and then got questioned like they didn't believe us. Behind them, there was a loud curse as Schlatt tripped over his coat, leaving the dining room, and Wilbur hid a smile behind his hand as Tommy huffed. Not to mention, Schlatt's a fucking asshole, he muttered under his breath. On the other side of Amesy, Rambu stifled a laugh. You're not wrong. He's always been a bit, difficult to work with. Wilbur raised an eyebrow. You've met him before? Yeah, I've helped Techno out during meetings and stuff a few times before, Rambu explained, twisting his fingers together. So I've met Schlatt, and most of the other leaders too. There was a pause as Wilbur and Tommy shared a look out of the corner of their eyes. Rambu not only knew the leaders, but had seen them in meetings before. This could be useful. Suddenly, Amesy chimed in. I've also met most of these guys, although I haven't really been in a whole lot of meetings with them since I'm just an attaché. Holy shit. Wilbur was really glad he and Tommy decided to sit at their usual spots tonight. Oh really? Oh really? Wilbur asked, fighting to keep his tone casual. What was it like, working with the other leaders before? The minute he locked eyes with Amesy, he knew that they knew exactly what he was doing. But before they could say anything, Rambu started talking, and Tommy and him both straightened to attention. Well, like I said, Schlatt can be kind of, difficult, Rambu began, lowering his voice as he leaned closer to Wilbur and Tommy. You want to know why he acts like, well, that? It's because he's drunk. Nearly all the time. I didn't realize it until one time we had a meeting last the entire day, and Schlatt usually carries a flask in his jacket, but I think he forgot it that time. He got more and more quiet as the day went on, saying less rude stuff and bringing up more actually kind of relevant discussion points. Not to say he was really good at negotiating, but you could tell he was actually paying attention for once. It didn't hit me till afterwards, though, when Techno told me that was the first time he'd ever seen Schlatt sober. And that was when I realized that, oh yeah, he hadn't been sober at all until then. How does he get anything done if he's fucking pissed all the time? Tommy asked, frowning at Rambu. I don't think he does, Rambu admitted, eyes wide. There's a rumor going round that he rigged the elections on Mantle. Amesy added, every time there's an election, we all think he's going to be voted out, but somehow he always wins. How's Mantle not gone to shit then? Wilbur asked. Amesy shrugged. Apparently, the economy is thriving over there, but I heard the taxes are killer. Well, if he'd been running an entire planet drunk off his ass for years now, and Mantle was still a financial superpower like Technoblade described it, maybe Schlatt wasn't as much of an idiot as he seemed to be. Even if he was a drunkard, Wilbur wasn't going to let his guard down around him. Anyone could play up a persona to make others underestimate them. Excuse me. While Wilbur didn't necessarily think this was the case with Schlatt, he wasn't going to rule it out either. What's about that, Tommy was cut off by Carl laughing loudly again, and he sighed and gestured towards the seer. The weird guy from Kanoko Kingdom. What's his deal? Oh, Marquis Carl? Rambu questioned. He's really nice. He's also high all the time. Amesy snorted. Rambu stifled another laugh. Well, that too. But he's really nice, even if he's a bit out of it sometimes. According to him and Princess Tina, as the seer, he has to maintain a level of awareness outside of himself at all times, and the mushrooms from Kanoko help him do that. Tommy blinked. What the fuck does that mean? I have no idea. Rambu shrugged. Kanoko is, like, all about spirituality stuff, though. So Carl's role is taken pretty seriously. I know he seems pretty goofy, but he actually knows a lot. Which I guess makes sense since he can see the future, but you forget that sometimes when he talks about, weirder stuff. Man, I feel bad for Tina, though. Amesy sighed, shifting their lamp so the other side of their cheek was getting equal light. It's gotta be a bit tiring to spend so much time with someone who's got one foot in the present and one foot in the future at all times. I know she acts tired sometimes, but she really does care about Carl. I asked her once about it, and she said that since Carl was identified as the next seer when he was a little kid, the two of them have known each other since they were really young, and he's basically her older friend. Rambu quickly said. Is she in line for the Kanoko throne? Wilbur asked, glancing back at Tina and Carl. Rambu shook his head. Nah, she's got a few older siblings ahead of her. Not to mention, even if she was in line to be Queen of Kanoko, it's not like she'd do much more than she's doing now as a princess. The monarchy there mostly just act as an advisory board that oversees the democratically elected government, but don't actually have their hands in a lot of things. And then the church provides spiritual guidance for the Prime Minister, right? Amesy asked, glancing at Rambu. Pretty much, Rambu nodded. Really don't understand how they have a monarchy, a church state, and a republic all at the same time, but they've been doing it for a while now, and it's worked out so far. So Tina and Carl were closer than they seemed, and Tina really held no major political power outside of acting as a member of an advisory board. Shit. That meant if they ever wanted anything from Kanoko, it would probably be more reasonable to go after Carl. But Wilbur didn't have the slightest fucking clue how to even ask the guy how his day was going. Not to mention, since Carl and Tina were childhood friends, whatever Wilbur said to Carl would likely get relayed to Tina anyway. Okay. So Kanoko Kingdom was likely going to be more trouble than it was worth to spend their efforts on. It was good to know that now, long before they wasted time trying to work over the princess and the seer. What's your take on the Badlands, then, Rambu? Wilbur asked, resting his chin in the palm of his hand. It must take a lot of work to run 3 planets under a single government. Oh yeah, it does, Rambu said, nodding as his eyes darted over to the group still deep in their discussion. The Badlands aren't a part of the Empire. They're just allied with us, so that makes their relationship a bit different. When it comes to working among themselves, they're very diplomacy-oriented and really good at coordinating with each other, but when it comes to outsiders like the Antarctic Empire, they don't bend that easily. Pausing, Rambu blinked a few times before dropping his gaze to his plate. They're all really nice, though. I haven't met the new guy, but Bad is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, just like, ever. Steppy, his life partner, is also pretty nice, but he also seems to stay out of the politics stuff for the most part. If you do manage to drag him into a discussion, he doesn't mince words, so I think Bad does more of the diplomacy stuff for him. There was another pause as Michael let out a deep, barking laugh at something Carl said. And when Wilbur glanced over, he saw Tina was giggling now too. Aunt Frost is also pretty friendly, and he and Ponk both have really good heads on their shoulders. At the mention of Ponk, Rambu lowered his voice even more. The last time Ponk was here, though, they didn't have a prosthetic arm. I have no idea what happened, but in the past, Ponk and Sam were practically inseparable. This visit, though, I haven't seen them make eye contact once. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like Sam looks kind of melancholy, almost, Amesy suggested, furrowing their brows. I might be imagining things, but there's something off about him. Pursing his lips, Rambu nodded. Yeah, I see what you mean. The Badlands don't really have a leader per se, but if you had to name one, most people would probably name either Bad or Sam. But if something's up with Sam, then things might be different this time around. And Michael McChill? What's up with that guy? Tommy asked, jerking his chin in the direction of the dark-haired man. Both Rambu and Amesy shared a look before shrugging in unison. Honestly, he keeps a lot of things to himself, so I'm not sure. Not like he's untrustworthy or anything, but more like he knows Serenity isn't exactly a huge claim for the Antarctic Empire outside of being an outer sector planet. He doesn't have a lot of weight to throw around, so he tends not to throw a fuss about stuff unless it really pisses him off, Rambu explained, dropping his hands from his lap and turning back to his food. I don't really, know a ton about all this stuff, though. This is just from what I've seen the past few times we've had conferences like this, so I'm not an expert or anything. Wilbur frowned at Rambu's sudden backtracking, eyeing him as he absently cut up his food without eating any of it. Damn it. Rambu must have caught on to the fact that he was spilling a lot of information on the other planets to two people he probably shouldn't be that cavalier with. Because Wilbur didn't believe for a second that he didn't know full well what he was talking about. He was being trained as a military strategist by Technoblade. Rambu definitely knew how to watch other people, especially since he seemed to be more of a wallflower type. Drink break. Better. Oh well. They'd still gotten quite a bit of valuable information about the other leaders from Rambu already, which Wilbur fully intended to put to good use. The rest of dinner passed by without much else of note. Amesy changed the subject to the weather of all things, and despite how pointless the topic was, given that they all resided far beneath the ice and weren't really affected by the weather on the surface, Rambo eagerly jumped onto the new topic. Wilbur continued to watch the other leaders out of the corner of his eye as they finished their own meals, and waited until the last of the Badlands council members had left before he pushed his already empty plate away. "You ready to go to bed, Tommy?" Wilbur asked, raising an eyebrow at his brother. Tommy, who looked like he was falling asleep in his chair, nodded. "Can you? I'm not carrying you," Wilbur said, before he could finish the question. "You're a bitch," Tommy mumbled as he stood up, shaking his head to wake himself up. They both said their goodbyes to Amesy and Rambo, before waving Jack over from where he was waiting along the wall to escort the two of them back to their room. They headed out into the main hallway, Jack standing just a tad straighter than he usually did, and not handing out as many sharp quips to either of them. Maybe he could tell they were too tired to banter, or maybe he was on his best behavior because of the presence of so many foreign powers in the palace. Either way, the walk back was quiet, and Wilbur was grateful for it. Their footsteps echoed across the stone, bouncing off the walls in an almost melodic rhythm. Tommy was leaning heavily into Wilbur's side, his eyes completely closed as he trusted Wilbur to guide him blindly through the halls. They turned another corner, and ahead of them, Wilbur watched Jack pass by a small alcove in the wall without even glancing in its direction. When Wilbur and Tommy passed by it, though, he paused. The alcove was actually a door, a normal swinging door instead of the automatic sliding ones. There had been a few normal doors in the palace that Wilbur had seen already, so that wasn't what drew his attention. No. What drew his attention was that this one was cracked open, and he could hear voices inside. The voices were far too soft for him to make out, but through the tiny sliver of light that escaped from the barely cracked door, Wilbur was able to make out two figures talking in hushed whispers. He got a glimpse of curly white hair and the glint of bright gold. Puffy and Sam. His head was bowed low, so he was face to face with her, and she was saying something to him with a very intense look on her face. Sam was nodding, most of his expression hidden by the mask that covered his mouth and nose. Frayed threads of their voices reached his ears, but he couldn't make out a single word they were saying, just worried tones and hushed noises. Wilbur only paused for a second to watch the two of them, when Sam began to lift his head as if he could feel the weight of Wilbur's stare. Wilbur yanked Tommy down the hall and away from the door, heart pounding in his ears. "Why'd you stop?" Tommy asked softly, eyes still closed and words slurred with sleep. "Nothing," Wilbur whispered back. "I thought I saw something, but it was a trick of the light." Humming, Tommy nodded and leaned further into him, glancing between Jack and Tommy. Wilbur wrapped an arm around his shoulders and tugged him close, a lump forming in his throat as he tried to think of what Sam and Puffy could have been talking about. It didn't make sense. Why would a counselor of the Badlands be having a private and seemingly secret conversation with the captain of the Royal Guard? If he had been talking to another Badlands council member, or even someone like Tina or Michael, that would make sense to Wilbur. But Puffy? It was odd. She wasn't involved in the politics of the Empire. Her job was to protect the Emperor and the Imperator. At least, that's what Wilbur assumed her role was. But, truth be told, Wilbur wasn't sure what exactly Puffy did all day. Given her title, he had assumed she spent her days supervising the Royal Guard, but what if there was more to it than that? Wilbur thought back to the meeting in the negotiations room. He had been too startled by Philza and Technoblade whispering in his ear about Schlatt to notice, Puffy had gone inside with them. She didn't take a seat at the table, but she had waited by the doors. Not outside the room, though. Inside, where she could hear every word that was said. Now, that in itself wasn't that unusual. It made sense to have a few guards in a room with that many powerful figures, but there was still something to note. Either way, Wilbur needed to pay more attention to her. But then again, he was already stretched so thin trying to keep note of nearly every important figure in the palace. If this was a game of chess, then it felt like Wilbur was only playing with half the pieces. There were too many possible enemies, too many figures to keep track of. It wasn't like there was anything he could do to change that for the time being, though. So he just took a mental note of Puffy and picked up the pace back to their room. After exchanging quiet goodbyes with Jack, Wilbur practically carried Tommy into the room. He clung on to Wilbur like he was a giant plush toy, whining in protest when Wilbur tried to pry him off to get him settled into the bed. In the end, Wilbur finally managed to wake Tommy up enough so he could change into his pajamas. Once they were both out of their formal clothes and settled under the blankets, Wilbur thought about bringing up what he saw between Sam and Puffy with Tommy. But considering how exhausted he was, he doubted Tommy would be able to process the possible implications of it tonight. Wilbur could tell him in the morning. After all, he needed his rest too. And that was that. Wilbur was exhausted. Tommy was fast asleep beside him, and all he needed to do now was sleep. Recharge his battery so he could be at the top of his game tomorrow. Except, he couldn't sleep. With the blankets drawn up under his chin, Wilbur stared at the ceiling of his room, willing himself to get tired. To his left, Tommy was snoring softly, the freckles on his cheeks glowing faint blue in the dim light of the room. The sound should have relaxed him. White noise that reassured him his little brother was here. They were both safe, and it was time for his body to surrender to sleep. But his head wouldn't let him. Thoughts kept buzzing around in his mind like flies, repeating his same questions over and over again. Why had Sam and Puffy been talking? What was the meeting tomorrow going to be like? What did Filza have in store for their future discussions? Squeezing his eyes shut, Wilbur tried his breathing exercises. He did them over and over again, willing the waves in his mind to stop crashing on the sandy shores. The sea foam sizzled as the questions spun and spun in the waves, and despite the fatigue clinging to him like a second skin, it wasn't pulling him under the water like it should have. He was floating at the top, being buffeted from side to side as he struggled to let go, to surrender to the darkness below. After a few more minutes of this, Wilbur's eyes blinked open again. He wasn't going to sleep like this. In the past, Wilbur probably would have called a servant to bring him a sleeping pill, but the idea of taking a sedative, of not being able to wake up in case Tommy needed him, it made his chest seize with panic. Aerith had wanted them to take sleeping pills, and if they had, they'd be dead. There was no reason for him to think Filza would try to kill him or Tommy in his sleep, especially not now with all the other foreign leaders here. It was illogical, but Wilbur couldn't bring himself to tap the disc waiting on his nightstand. His hand wouldn't move, no matter how many times he told it to. So a sleeping pill was out. That meant Wilbur would have to find another way to get his mind to shut off. As quietly as possible, Wilbur climbed out of the bed, careful not to disturb Tommy. Once he was standing, he glanced back and saw Tommy's eyes were still closed, and his snoring was uninterrupted. While Wilbur didn't like the idea of leaving Tommy alone while he slept, it wasn't as if he could just pace in the room without waking him up. Besides, it would only be a few minutes. Even if Wilbur couldn't get himself to take a sleeping pill, he wasn't that much of a nervous wreck that he couldn't leave his brother alone for 10 minutes. Right? Clenching his jaw, Wilbur hurried out of the room before he could talk himself out of it. Choosing a random direction, he started walking down the dark and empty halls of the palace, the cold stone floor seeping through his socks and making a chill run down his spine. There was something hollow ringing in his chest without Tommy pressed against his side. Since they'd arrived on Zephyr's floor, Tommy had always been either right next to him or within his line of sight. This was the first time they'd separated since leaving Eldingberger, and it was startling how prominent the absence was to Wilbur. Still, he wasn't going to get any sleep sitting in that room, so he forced himself to keep walking. At first, his direction was random. He wasn't trying to find anything. All he wanted was to walk until the buzzing in his head shut up. But without even thinking about it, Wilbur soon found himself near that room he'd seen Puffy and Sam talking in. Before he could get to the door to see if they were still in there, he heard footsteps and immediately ducked into a corner. Pressing himself against the wall, Wilbur begged for the shadows to hide him as he watched the door to the room swing open. Light spilled across the stone floor, and Wilbur watched Sam step out, air softly whooshing in and out of his mask. His dark eyes flickered around the hall, and Wilbur winced when his gaze fell on him. But Sam didn't focus on him, and Wilbur breathed a sigh of relief when he realized he hadn't been spotted. Wilbur watched as Sam shut the door behind him, turning down the hall back in the direction of the dining room. It didn't make sense for him to go there at this time of night. The food had likely already been cleared, and if Sam was hungry, he could just call for a servant to bring him a late-night snack. No. Sam had to be going somewhere. And if Wilbur's hunch was right, it was related to whatever he'd been discussing with Puffy earlier. Wilbur was grateful he hadn't worn shoes as he followed Sam down the dining hall, keeping close to the wall where the shadows would cover him if he needed. The pale glow from the city lights outside the palace stretched across the floor in long slits, and Wilbur winced every time he had to walk through a patch of light, making sure to stay as far from Sam as he could while keeping him in his line of sight. Sam seemed to know exactly where he was going, ducking down different hallways with practiced ease. When he had been walking for only a few minutes, he'd stopped at another door to knock on it. Wilbur hung back, watching as CBK stepped out. The two nodded, exchanging a few words Wilbur couldn't make out, before they continued walking in the same direction as before. It was strange. Despite the unfamiliarity of Zephyr's palace, something like deja vu settled on Wilbur's shoulders as he quietly followed the two council members through the halls. For a moment, he wasn't sure why it felt like he'd done this before, and then the memory flashed behind his eyes. "Will, come on, hurry up!" Nikki whispered to him, hand outstretched from where she had pressed herself into an alcove. Glancing up and down the hall, Wilbur took a breath before sprinting across the open space. Nikki grabbed his hand and yanked him into the alcove, the two of them struggling to stifle their giggles as the approaching footsteps got louder. The Blazophane yield this month has been higher than our average for this time of year, so I'm wondering if we could make an effort to put aside the excess for future reserves. Wilbur could hear Eric talking to someone as they got closer to the hiding spot he and Nikki had chosen. She tugged him further back against the wall, and they listened as Eric turned the corner right before passing by the alcove. their footsteps fading as they made their way into the meeting room. Press your ear to the wall, Nikki instructed as the door clicked shut, cutting Aaron's voice off. Doing as she said, Wilbur pressed his ear to the wall. Faintly, he could just make out Aaron's deep voice echoing on the other side. It was difficult to understand the words. Hi, Mayhem. Where was I? It was difficult to understand the words, but the more he focused, the clearer it got. Our reserves are already depleted enough from after last windy season. I understand we could use it for profit, but it's better to start stockpiling now for the upcoming windy season, given how production completely shuts down during that month. Your Highness, while we understand your reasoning, Queen Marina has requested. Before the siren woman could finish her sentence, another voice that was much clearer than the others cut through. What are you two doing? Stiffening, Nikki and Wilbur jumped back, finding themselves face to face with a frowning servant. We were just playing hide and seek? Wilbur tried, giving the woman a sheepish smile. Aren't you supposed to be in your studies, Orpheus? The woman asked. Wilbur paled. I finished early. Before the woman could question this, Nikki jumped in. Aren't you supposed to call him Prince Orpheus? This seemed to be a wrong thing to say. The woman's frown turned into a sharp scowl, and Wilbur shrunk back at the force of her glare on him. How would you know, Siren? The woman asked, shooting daggers at Nikki with her gaze. This isn't your planet. Unlike Wilbur, Nikki didn't shrink back at the sharp anger lining the woman's face. Instead, she squared her shoulders and shot the woman the fiercest glare she could manage. It's Lady Niachu to you, ma'am. And I don't have to be from Eldingvega to know that a servant is required to refer to the loyalty by their title. It's a sign of respect. Royal titles are for actual royals, not a bastard child, the woman sneered. Embarrassment, hot and shameful, crept onto his cheeks. Wilbur ducked his head to try and hide his expression, while Nikki was squeezing his hand hard enough to hurt. Nikki, just let go, Wilbur muttered, trying to squeeze past the woman so he could escape down the hall. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll head back to my lessons now. The woman seemed pleased as she straightened up. While he could tell Nikki wanted to say more, he knew that if she did, it would just give the staff more reason to hate both of them. It was easier to just go along with what they said. Besides, it's not like she was wrong. Wilbur only had his title out of formality, not any kind of blood tied to the throne. That was something he was never going to be allowed to forget. As they headed down the hall and away from the meeting room, the woman called out one last thing. You're only here because of the King Regent's kindness. It do you good to remember how fortunate you are, City. Hearing someone call him City was like an electric shock running through his entire body. That woman said his Eldingvegger name with the same contempt, the same complete disappointment that Tommy's father had always said it with. Like Wilbur was making a mistake just by breathing. Nikki squeezed his hand tighter. Glancing back at the woman, she opened her mouth, and Wilbur yanked on her arm before she could speak. You can't use your voice on her, he whispered, dragging her away before she could command the woman. But Nikki, she's not worth it, Wilbur said, knowing how much trouble Nikki could get in if she pulled something like that. It's not fair the way she spoke to you, though, Nikki argued, speaking louder now that the woman was out of sight. You're just as much of a prince as Tommy is. I'm not, though. Not by blood, Wilbur said, dropping her hand and pushing his hands through his hair. Suddenly, there were fingers on his wrists, tugging his hands back down as Nikki forced him to meet her eyes. That woman is an idiot. Tommy is your brother, and therefore just as much of a prince as he is, and therefore you're just as much of a prince as he is. You deserve respect, Wilbur. It's complicated. It doesn't matter. You can't let them walk all over you like that, Nikki insisted, squeezing his wrists hard enough to bruise. Even if they don't like you, you need to demand that they treat you with the same courtesy they treat any other royal. Otherwise, they'll never respect you. I don't know if I can do that, Wilbur admitted, his voice shaking. You can, and you will, Nikki told him, her silver eyes glowing. I'll make sure of it. Fuck. Wilbur had forgotten about all the times he and Nikki had run around the palace as kids, listening in on meetings they weren't supposed to. He could practically feel Nikki's hands on his wrists, tugging him down twisting hallways, squeezing hard every time a servant got mad at the two of them. He could practically hear her whispering in his ear, reminding him that he couldn't sit back and let others walk all over him. If he wanted respect, if he wanted to be treated like an equal, he had to act like he deserved it. Right now, Wilbur was sneaking around a palace to listen in on things he wasn't supposed to hear, in a place where he was struggling to earn respect. If Nikki was here, he wouldn't have to fight the urge to cower every time Philza looked his way. If Nikki was here, he wouldn't be second-guessing himself every 5 seconds. If Nikki was here... Nikki wasn't here. She wasn't here because Wilbur had left her behind. And while Wilbur couldn't fix that, the least he could do was remember what she'd told him. Clenching his jaw, he hurried down the hallway, determined not to lose sight of Sam and CBK. It wasn't long before they reached the negotiations room. Unlike before, the sliding door had been left open. Sam and CBK walked into the room, and Wilbur hung back, ducking into a small alcove nearby. Then he listened. Sam, CBK, Philza greeted, sounding like he was smiling at the two council members. Thank you for joining us at such a late hour. Are the other council members going to be joining us? Bad said he might show up, but he's also tired from the trip, so I'm not sure, Sam explained. I can take a post outside the door, Puffy offered, and Wilbur jumped at the sound of her voice. That way I can open it up for him if he arrives. I want you to hear what we discussed though, Captain, Philza said, sounding unsure. How about we just leave the door open for the time being? If he doesn't arrive soon, we'll assume he fell asleep. Someone might overhear if you leave the doors open, Your Majesty, Puffy told him. Take a post outside, then, to make sure no one is eavesdropping. You'll still be able to hear our discussion, no? No? There was a pause, and Wilbur was extremely grateful he'd already tucked himself into the alcove, hidden from the main view of the hallway. All right, Your Majesty. There was the sound of footsteps as Puffy presumably settled herself outside the door to the negotiations room. Wilbur pressed himself further into the wall, even though he knew Puffy wouldn't be able to see him from this angle. "The hall is clear," Puffy called out after a moment. Wilbur pressed a hand against his mouth so Puffy wouldn't hear his sigh of relief. "Great! Do we have everyone here then?" Felza asked, clapping his hands together. "Where are Aunt Frost, Skeppy, and Ponk?" Another person, Tina, Wilbur realized, asked. "They all wanted to rest. We figured one representative from each planet would work fine, but if Bad wants to sleep, he knows we'll fill him in anyway," CPK explained. "Can someone please explain what all the cloak and dagger is about?" Schlatt's booming voice echoed down the hall. "My evening plans were to see if the Zephyr's 4 vodka is really as good as everyone says it is, not to deal with some clandestine meeting bullshit." "We'll have plenty of time to try the vodka later," Technoblade told him, already sounding annoyed. "We wanted to talk to you guys about what's going on with us and Eldingvegger right now." "Without Prince Theseus or Prince Orpheus around," Michael pointed out, making Wilbur stiffen. "Precisely," Filza agreed. "As I'm sure you can imagine, our discussions have to remain somewhat censored around the two of them. We'll be having other private meetings at more reasonable times while you're all staying here. But I just wanted to get your initial opinions on where you think we should go with our negotiations." "You're the Emperor. Don't you already have that figured out?" Schlatt asked, sarcasm dripping from his words. "I am your Emperor, correct, Schlatt, but we all know I'm not Dream. I don't rush into decisions because I think it will give me status or power. I strategize, and preferably, I like to strategize with other prominent figures in my empire," Filza said, sounding as though he were clenching his teeth. "Or, in the Badlands case, we'll need to agree on a strategy before any moves can be taken." "So you're asking us what we think you should do, and then you're gonna tell us what you want to do and we'll go from there?" Michael questioned. There was a moment of silence and Wilbur imagined Filza was nodding, because then Michael continued with, "Well, if we're putting it out there to start, I think you're fucking crazy if you don't take over Eldingvegger." "I gotta agree with McChill over here," Schlatt chimed in. "I don't get why you're wasting time with those brats while Eldingvegger is literally right there for the taking." "In case you forgot, Dream currently has control of Eldingvegger," Technoblade jumped in. "I wouldn't call it an easy conquest." "Okay, well, it's not like the 12-year-old is gonna know shit about how to take it from Dream. Either way, that's solely on you guys," Schlatt huffed. "We're aware of that," Techno shot back, and Wilbur could imagine him clenching his fist. Okay, where did the music go? I guess it's just... the video's still playing, so I guess it's just quiet in this moment. I'll just take this time to drink more water. Okay, I'm gonna skip the... Oh, that just raises and lowers the volume. Why does it do that? That's not how it works on my laptop. Where's the... Okay, that works. Prince Theseus is 15, right? Carl suddenly asked, and Wilbur was surprised to learn that he was in the room as well. 12, 15, what's the difference? Schlatt laughed. Again, he's a stupid kid. We don't need him to take over Eldingvegger, so I don't get why you're wasting your time with him and his nanny brother. Phil isn't the one to depose rulers when taking over a planet. You should know that, Schlatt, Sam said in a tight voice. Well, fucking obviously, or else I wouldn't be here. But it's not like you're gonna put the 15-year-old on the throne when you do take it over. He paused then. Wait, are you planning on putting that brother of his on the throne? Are you planning on putting that brother of his on the throne then? Wilbur's breath hitched in his throat. No, of course not, Phil's immediately said. And something heavy settled itself over Wilbur's shoulders. He has no blood ties to the throne whatsoever, and from what I can tell, it's more than a sore subject for him. I have a feeling that the Elding Vegrians would be more pissed about Prince Orpheus on the throne than if I were to rule the planet myself. What gave you that impression? Tina asked. From what I saw today, Prince Orpheus seems more than well equipped to take over the throne. Oh, he's certainly well trained, Philza agreed. And Wilbur dug his nails into his palm. He would absolutely do a better job than his brother. But I'm not going to put him on that throne. That I can assure you. Then what are your plans for those kids? CBK questioned. Another silence hung over the room. This time, Wilbur was sure it wasn't because someone was nodding. A beat passed, and then another. Then, was still working that out, but I have a few things in mind, Philza said, as if that wasn't a blatant non-answer. I want to work with them both on these negotiations because I'd rather stay on good terms with them both. It'll make things easier in the long run. Are you considering an alliance with Eldingvigor, like what we have? Sam asked. Nah, Technoblade cut in. Our alliance with the Badlands works because you all are totally fine at managing yourselves. Eldingvigor is way too big of a target to remain independent. Honestly, I'm surprised it even lasted this long. Wait, can we backtrack to Phil ominously saying he has things in mind for Prince Theseus and Prince Orpheus? Tina interrupted, sounding annoyed. You said it before I could. CBK agreed. Not to beat a dead horse here, but seeing those two kids get shitless today and then having you say you have things in mind for them really isn't inspiring a lot of confidence right now. While you all have a say in how we move forward regarding Eldingvegor, when it comes to princes, that's not something I feel the need to divulge, Philza explained, making a shudder run down Wilbur's spine. All at once, several people began to talk over one another. Wilbur struggled to try and make out who was saying what, but was saved when Technoblade shouted above the others. Hey! Hey! The arguing quieted down. That's better. One at a time, please. Considering this room is filled with some of the most powerful people in the galaxy, I'd assume you all know the concept of taking turns to speak. Unless we need to make a rule where you guys raise your hands and Phil can call on you like a teacher. Shit. Technoblade pulled no punches. An ashamed silence fell over the room. A few seconds ticked by, Wilbur counting on his fingers from where he was slumped against the wall. Then... Fine. I'll start then. Sam finally began. Phil, you know I respect you as a leader and our ally, but you do realize how unnerving you're making this whole thing sound? You need to give us a little more than just saying you have plans for those two kids. Or else I'm gonna start thinking we need to be worried for their safety. Suddenly, a high-pitched laugh echoed out of the room that made Wilbur flinch in surprise. Phil's not gonna hurt them. Don't worry about that, Carl said, words almost honey-like as his voice slurred. Someone sighed deeply, and Wilbur imagined it was either Philza or Technoblade. Thank you, Carl, Philza told him. I have no plan plans to harm those boys. Techno can attest. I'm just still thinking over the possibilities, so I can't really share my plans because I haven't decided on a course of action yet. Can you at least try to give us an idea of what you're thinking? Michael asked. There was a pause, and Wilbur could see Philza tapping his talons against the table, as he often did when he was thinking on something. I suppose the best way to put it is that I see potential in those boys, especially Prince Orpheus. Especially Prince Orpheus. Philza saw potential in him. Not just Tommy. Him. Wilbur. Despite the ice encasing each and every individual rib in his chest, warmth blossomed out from the very center of it all. Not a comforting warmth, though. Something burning. Something to be feared. So you're intending to use them, Sam said, judgment lacing his tone. In a way, Philza laughed, and it reminded Wilbur of glass shattering across the floor. I'm not going to hurt them, but keep in mind, those brothers came here, to Zephyr's Fall. They are under our protection right now, mine and Techno's. Our decision regarding Eldingvega is separate from our negotiations with the princes, so you will focus on the former, and we'll deal with the latter. Phil, I'm not going to let an opportunity like this slip through my fingers, Philza emphasized. Wait, no, I'm not going to let an opportunity like this slip through my fingers, Philza emphasized. Each word uttered like a needle creating a stitch. Every sound intentional and sharp. Are you talking about Eldingvegger or the princes? Sam asked, his words equally as careful. The silence that followed stretched out, suffocating heavy even from where Wilbur was sitting outside the room. He heard Puffy quietly take a deep breath, before the squeak of her boots told him she was walking back into the room. I don't think Counselor Bad is going to be showing up, Puffy told the group, so I think we should probably go ahead and shut the doors. Sighing, Philza muttered yes, go ahead. Then there was a soft whoosh, and the hallway went silent. There were no more voices, no more footsteps, no secret words floating through the air. Wilbur wasn't sure how to feel, because it was as if he learned so much and absolutely nothing at the same time. The only real knowledge he got from this was that Philza and Technoblade wanted to bring Eldingvegger into the Empire, which Wilbur had already figured was the case anyway. But now he also knew that Philza had plans for him and Tommy, something he wouldn't even tell the other leaders. And he saw potential in them both, but especially him. No one had ever told him he had potential for anything. It was strange to realize that someone was looking at him for once and not straight through him. After waiting a few minutes to make sure the hallway was empty, Wilbur pushed to his feet, wincing at how stiff his muscles were after being bent for so long. He straightened his legs out and stepped out from the alcove, eager to get back to his room to check on Tommy. Before he could even take one step, though, there was a soft whoosh, followed by the sound of footsteps behind him. I'm telling you, the walls are glowing now, and there's so many beautiful colors in the air. Whirling around, Wilbur's heart dropped into his stomach when he found himself locking eyes with Carl. Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Wilbur was standing right outside the negotiations room. It was the middle of the night, and there was absolutely no reason for him to be out there unless he was trying to eavesdrop. Shit. Fuck. The minute Filzer heard about this, he would know that Wilbur had been listening in on their discussion. Before he could try to stammer out some kind of excuse, Carl smiled at him. Wilbur waited. He waited for Carl to yell to the others that Wilbur was out there, or to possibly yell for Puffy, but instead, Carl just smiled softly, lifting a hand to wave at him. Slowly, Wilbur waved back, his blood roaring in his ears. "Carl! Come back in here, we're still talking!" Tina called out from inside the room. There was another beat. Then Carl dropped his waving hand and nodded once at Wilbur before turning back to the negotiations room. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Wilbur alone in the hallway once again. Was Carl not going to say anything? Or did Carl think Wilbur was part of his visions? That was certainly possible. If someone was on hallucinogens as often as Carl seemed to be, there probably came a point where they just stopped questioning the strange things they saw. It was entirely possible that Carl's lack of a reaction was because he thought Wilbur wasn't actually there, and even if he did think Wilbur was in the hallway, maybe Wilbur could just pretend he wasn't. Despite the fear wrapping around his chest like a vice, ice lighting up his veins at the idea of Carl telling Filza that Wilbur had been eavesdropping, he knew his best option was to hope that Carl simply wrote Wilbur off as a hallucination. If Wilbur tried to approach him about this, Carl would know it was real, and Wilbur would be left scrambling to try and convince Carl not to tell anyone. Right now, even if Carl did tell Filza he was out there, the others might write it off as a vision anyway. Because again, there was no reason for Wilbur to be out there this time of night. Sam and CBK hadn't seen Wilbur following them, so to everyone in that room, he had no way of knowing there was a secret meeting going on without him. And so, ignoring the icy hand clawing up his spine, Wilbur turned on his heel and practically ran down the hall back towards his room. He kept his footsteps light, but darted as quickly as he could between the shadows, silently pleading with every force in the universe that he didn't have any more surprise run-ins. Luck was on his side, it seemed. Wilbur made it back to his room without any issue, and slid under the covers as gently as he could, careful not to wake Tommy, who was right where Wilbur had left him. Staring at his ceiling, Tommy's soft snoring filled the room. And despite the fact that his thoughts were spinning even more out of control than they had before, now his exhaustion seemed to fully catch up with him. His limbs were heavy and his eyes slipped shut of their own accord, sleep practically clawing at him compared to how awake he'd been before. The waves dragged him under, and the icy water embraced him as everything went dark, and he drifted off into sleep. Man, Bones and the Beast kills it every time. Like, we're not even close to being done with this story. Like, hold on. I could have just pressed the top button, but oh well. Excuse me. There's like, what? Yeah, there's 11 chapters, and I think it's still going on. Like, man. And she writes other things as well, like at the same time. It's nuts, dude. Alright. I think that is going to be my stream for today. Let's see if there's anybody we can raid, eh? I know who we can raid. Raid. Bip Bop Emma. I see. Oh wait, no. Maybe there's... Do I still... Thing is, it's one viewer, but that viewer is literally me on my other laptop. Or, I mean, me on my, like reading chat on my laptop. Do I still do it anyway? I mean, I'm watching the stream now, so I guess... Oh, okay, well... Anyway... Thank you guys for watching. Not sure if I'll be live tomorrow. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see how things go. As always, if you're new to my stream, be sure to leave a follow. At 150 followers, I'm doing an entire stream in a British accent, no matter what the content is. So, yeah, that should be fun. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.